Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, lawmakers extend their calendar after one of the most contentious legislative sessions in memory. We get a recap from two veteran First Coast political analysts. Later in the program, volunteering for unique learning experiences with lifetime impact. But first, lawmakers took a one-week pause before diving back into the budget next week, and it seemed like a good time to discuss the session's winners, losers, and new laws, along with what to expect when the bruising session resumes. Here to tell us about it is A.G. Gancarski, Northeast Florida correspondent at Florida Politics. Good morning, A.G.
Good morning, and don't forget my column with Jacksonville Today.
Oh, and a column that's right, here at Jacksonville Today, which is always much appreciated and awaited with bated breath. We're also joined by Obi Umunna. He's an attorney here in town and a longtime campaign manager. Good morning, Obi.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So let's just start with the politics of this session. Embittered, combative. First time we've seen the legislature reject this governor and his agenda. What's happening, AG?
Well, it's year 7 in the governor's term, so this is usually when legislatures develop spines, and that happened with the House. House Speaker Daniel Perez and his leadership team, which includes Wyman Duggan of Jacksonville, they decided they were going to draw a line in the sand, and they really did on a number of issues. They bucked the governor on, his desire to push property tax onto the ballot this year. They've got a study group that's going to be emerging ahead of the 2026 session and into it with some advisory things. They've bucked him on the Hope Florida issue regarding $10 million of money that went from a Medicaid settlement that the governor has framed as the cherry on top to the Hope Florida Foundation, which in turn was funneled toward a political committee controlled by James Uthmeyer, the Attorney General, fighting constitutional amendments last year. And they fought him on a number of other things too, but really the issue here is Daniel Perez has stood up to this governor in a way no other Republican has. And, if you want to go back and look at the genesis of this, it really is 2023 when the governor's political action committee compelled people on the legislative floor on the last day or two of session to sign pledge cards to support DeSantis for president. We know what happened with that. And revenge is a dish best served cold. And this was a cold dish for revenge for Ron DeSantis. It's been a very exciting session. DeSantis has been all over the media, all over his safe spaces. Laura Ingraham, Mark Levin, Dana Lash, talking about, how bad the Florida House is, talking about people that nobody on a national level heard of before he started talking about them. So it's been interesting to see. And of course, the governor, once they do pass this budget next month, will have his final revenge because any member projects and people who crossed him will get the veto pen.
Because it's a line item.
Exactly. So, 1 year he had the red wedding vetoes, basically $1 billion of vetoes. I think this can be a walk in the park compared to what you're going to see when he's got the veto pen next month.
Obi, the animosity was so strong. I mean, as AG says, you can get to the lame duck years for a governor, and the legislature does push back. But this was such whiplash after these years of just total fealty from the legislature to the governor.
Yeah, I mean, there was basically 6 years of being bullied by Governor DeSantis, and then this was the year they decided to punch back. Even, AG didn't touch on this, but they gavelled in and gavelled out on a legal immigration special session just to prove a point to the governor that they were not going to be pushed around. And so
because he asked them to do a special session, and
they did not want to do it.
They said, "We'll do ours, not yours."
And really, what they're showing is that they look to Trump as opposed to him. They want to make sure that he understands that Trump is the leader of the Florida Republican Party and not him. And so you're seeing a pushback in ways that we have not seen. They did veto overrides, and I'm sure they're assuming that they're going to veto override whatever he decides to do in this year. And so you're seeing one of the, DeSantis was one of the most important and strongest Republicans in the state, now really limited to a lame duck status.
How did that play out for Democrats? I mean, we know that there was a lot of infighting among Republicans. Democrats are obviously the real minority in
Right,
that,
right.
and they have very little power. But how did it play out for them?
Unfortunately, Democrats didn't really have power to take advantage of the Republican infighting. They had their own kind of inner party squabbles as well. I think what Democrats were really able to do, or maybe able to kind of fight a few bills that weren't able to come up, and prevent some things from happening. But unfortunately, they do not have the power to really move anything forward.
I saw that there was a notice that went out from a major LGBT lobby, AG, saying, we won a lot this session simply by, it didn't pass. It kind of didn't get to a lot of these anti-DEI. There was the flag effort to prevent government buildings from flying certain flags, including the rainbow flag. So there was things that had been on the Republican agenda that, because there was so much, you know, uh, dis disagreement and dissent, within the ranks, those things kind of didn't get the priority that they might have.
Right. And you've got to look at it in terms of the House and Senate have competing priorities. They have competing voices in their ears. We saw it in a number of pieces of legislation. There's an education bill, for example, that if the Senate version had passed as the language was written, it would have banned university polling like UNF from doing candidates and campaigns. They could have done issue polling that nobody really cares about.
Mhm.
What issue matters to you most? Well, that's not a headline turner. What does turn headlines is who's going to win the governor's race. And they had that language in there. The House did not. There was a dispute over university president searches and all of that, but ultimately they couldn't come together. And the frustration on the Senate side with House Speaker Daniel Perez was off the charts. I mean, former Senate President Kathleen Passidomo, who is the Rules Chair this year, she said during a debate last week, "Well, we've only got a year and a half with the Speaker left," which kind of tells you where it went. But it's like the House drew a line in the sand; they wouldn't play ball, and the upshot was you didn't see a lot of rollbacks from marginalized groups that you otherwise might have seen if it had been more of a kumbaya vibe in the state capitol.
Was it a little break from the culture war kind of legislation that we've seen?
Unintentionally, and with
Yeah.
that flag bill you passed or you mentioned, Senator Randy Fine, who was running for Congress from jump, as soon as Mike Waltz was picked to move to the Trump administration, he was sponsoring that. So anything that Randy Fine was carrying, once he vamoosed from Tallahassee, that was it for him.
Including the guns
On
rollback, which
campus.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so those college kids who might have wanted to, carry their M16s into class to negotiate a better grade are out of luck.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that, at the beginning of session, I think the Senate and the House kind of bonded together to fight DeSantis. And then at the end, it was kind of a Royal Rumble where they all three were kind of fighting each other
Mm.
on different issues. And I think that was just what happened this year and allowed some of the other things that there were maybe priorities going into the session not to happen because there was so much infighting on every little bill.
Yeah, I mean, DeSantis kind of, toward the end, he kind of goofus and gallanted the Senate and the House, basically. The House is goofus, the Senate is gallant. I can work with the Senate, I can't work with the House. But yeah, there was that kind of, three-way dance mentality for
Mm.
much of the session.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to political analysts A.G. Gancarski and Obi Umunna about lessons from the session, which is on a 1-week break. You can join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. One particular Democrat that stood out this session, Jason Pizzo, declaring his party dead, said he's going to be an independent. What is the significance of that? I mean, he has been a very vocal member of that party for a number of years.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Pizzo's move shocked a lot of people, but you could have seen it coming. I mean, he was more centrist than the caucus, and I mean, he was the Senate Minority Leader this session. So when he abdicated that, and Lori Berman took over with days left in the session, that was a really interesting move. Pizzo's been talked about as a candidate for governor. He may still run as kind of a spoiler, which would probably be really good for the Republican nominee, whoever that is, likely Byron Donalds at this point. But when you look at Pizzo, I mean, he's always kind of been his own man, and this is something that when you look at the response of legislators around this area was really interesting. Both Jennifer Bradley, a Republican from Clay County, Tracy Davis, who will be Senate Democratic leader starting in 2027, they had nothing but positive things to say about him. But Representative Angie Nixon, who may also run for governor if you believe some of the gossip, um, she said that Pizzo's been dumping on marginalized communities for years, and good riddance. And so there's kind of that run the gamut responses. Nikki Fried, the chair of the Florida Democratic Party, essentially said that the party was better off without him. But I don't know, if you have a marginalized party, it's basically got about a quarter of the legislature. If you're losing one of the voices that basically says, to moderate white men, hey, there's a path for you in this party, and then that voice says, I can't even work with these people. I don't know if that's a good message. I mean, Democrats are facing marginalization. A lot of it's not their fault. Some of it's from the way the maps are drawn. You've got a lot of R+10 districts, but D+30 districts, which ensure that the most left-leaning Democrats are nominated, elected, and unable to get things through the process. So Pizzo leaving is really a loss for the party. It's a loss for the Senate caucus, in the sense that they no longer have a voice that can actually talk to the mainstream in a way that others in the party have not been able to.
Do you see this as part of just a larger movement towards independence when it comes to, voters certainly are bleeding from the parties in a way and becoming more vocally independent?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Jason Pizzo issue is an interesting one because it's clear that he wanted to run for governor, and I think he was not getting the response back from the party that I think he wanted. I think it was interesting that maybe 2 or 3 days after David Jolly had changed to be a Democrat,
Another candidate
which
for
is kind of the
governor.
role that he would have played, right? He decided to be independent. I think going back to what AG said about the different responses, I thought obviously Rep. Nixon was one response, but I thought Finch's Driscoll, who is not really the same part of the party that Angie is, a little bit more conservative, a little bit more centrist than Angie Nixon was also kind of saying the same thing about Jason Pizzo. It felt to me this was more of like a personality than necessarily politics. I think there are some centrists, particularly the South Florida. There's some centrists in Tallahassee, and I just feel like Jason Pizzo, there was some personality conflicts and some things that really he just didn't vibe with the group. He was voted the Senate minority leader, so part of his kind of complaints about the party probably should fall on him as a leader. But I do think he has always been independent in a sense, and he was one of the few Democrats that got was given kind of committee chairs and that kind of stuff in a particular government. So he did kind of really ride the middle. But I do think this is more of a way for him to really kind of feel free from having to say he was a Democrat, and maybe a path forward for him for governor, because with David Jolly in the race, that kind of takes his role.
Yeah. Well, we know that there were fewer bills filed this session than in the previous sessions, as many as 18 or 20% fewer than last year. But there were some that passed and some carried by local lawmakers, including Jennifer Bradley, who you mentioned, this condo reform, which is interesting because, of course, she represents Clay County, which isn't exactly the condo capital of Florida. But she did, manage to kind of shepherd in reforms that people had been calling for after the Surfside collapse prompted all of these very burdensome financial requirements for condos. How do you think she fared in this legislative session? And also someone like Wyman Duggan, who, as you said, is kind of the lieutenant to the Speaker of the House and part of our local delegation.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bradley had a very productive session. She also got the Tristan Murphy Act, which, is basically helping people who are in the criminal justice system who have mental health issues. And Bradley's, very much an independent. I mean, she's not somebody who is party line Republican. I mean, she obviously is capital R Republican in the sense of party registration, but she's kind of like the Republican Pizzo in the sense that she's willing to take positions that go against the orthodoxy, the talking points, the kind of things that light up AM radio. I think for Wyman also, is a productive session in especially reputationally. There's talk that Wyman Duggan could run for mayor here in 2027, and he did nothing to dispel those rumors. He hasn't shut down those rumors, and he's part of that Daniel Perez machine. So as Ways and Means chair, he's played an important role. He played an important role in the process. It wasn't so much the bills he got through, but kind of the vibes he created and the fact that he is a good team player. And it's like I keep pointing to that mayoral race. He's got $1 million banked in his political committee, which is much more than any of these other Republicans do. If he runs, he will have the Tallahassee support. It remains to be seen. There's a lot of talk of who's going to be the Republican standard bearer against Donna Deegan. But Wyman Duggan is well positioned for whatever he does down the road. He's very methodical. He's a land use attorney by trade, but he's a consensus builder. And he managed to play that role where he shepherded the Republican House caucus, but he also operated well with Democrats. And when he was committee chair, you hear somebody like Anna Eskamani say basically she was happy to be working with him. And Anna Eskamani is one of the most left of center Democrats in the caucus. So, I'd say it was a win for him this session overall.
So bills that did pass, we mentioned the condo thing. One was this very controversial ballot initiative that is measure, Obi, that's going to make it a lot harder, some say, to put constitutional amendments on the ballot. It's going to increase penalties for any kind of signature fraud. It focuses on the petition gathering process. This was something that, is a political statement in a lot of ways as much as a practical one.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, if you look at the history of Florida, Florida has been controlled by Republicans for almost 25 years, but throughout this time, they've been able to pass what you would say is left-leaning ballot initiatives, felony restoration, higher minimum wage, and things like that. And I think you've seen over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, we have raised the ability from 50% to 60% to pass a ballot initiative, and we are now in a point where I think they are attacking these initiatives in a way that are going to make it very hard for people to really go out and collect signatures. I mean, I think some of the restrictions are you have to be a U.S. citizen in order to collect these petitions. You can't have had a felony. And I know that, people that in order to do this kind of petition work, these is some of the jobs that people are able to get because you have to be off all day and not have a regular job to be able to do this. And so there's a lot of kind of raising for bonds and all the $1 million bonds in order to even get on the ballot. And I think the job is to make it much harder for citizen initiatives to happen. Right now, there's a Medicaid initiative that people that are planning to fight this particular kind of bill, but it is they want to make it as hard as possible.
Yeah, there's also online training. There's also registration with the state. There's also a rule that you can only collect 25 at a time signatures. So let's say you're doing a petition drive at a concert, and you come home with 1,600 petitions. You're going to need to basically spread those out among 64 people can bring them in. And that's really the type of thing it's intended to thwart these processes. I will say that there have been cases of fraud regarding petition organizers, and that really was the case. It's not just something that is, hypothetical. This is something Jennifer Bradley brought up in debate on this. These are real things. And, this is kind of, it takes the Wild Wild West approach away from this and basically professionalizes it. But the kind of people who are doing petition drives, doing them as a gig, they're not really the kind of people that work well in the professional world necessarily. People you see out there with clipboards getting your signature at an event, they aren't necessarily the kind of people who, are going to the office. So, we have plenty of burdens on these people already in terms of what congressional districts they have to come from, in terms of the petitions being collected and all of that. This is going to make it tougher for things like legalized marijuana, for rollback of abortion rights, and all of that.
And we should say, I mean, of course, there's a lot of people out there getting signatures who are just volunteers and not necessarily part
Mhm.
of any,
Well, it makes it
paid
harder
initiative.
for you to be just a volunteer to do that. I mean, that's also part of it. Like, if you and this has happened for a while, you have to be kind of registered with the state in order to collect petitions. You can't just come out of and say, "Hey, we want to go collect petitions today." It is very hard unless you're like, and even from your family. I mean, unless you have you can only connect 25 from your family. I mean, that I think it makes it really hard for you to say, I want to go volunteer and collect petitions for a particular issue, because you have to sign up with the state, you have to have a certain number, and that's just not something a volunteer who wants to come out on a Saturday and petition for Medicaid or abortion rights or marijuana is going to be able to do.
We have a question from Tom on Facebook. What about the anti-fluoridation bill? This was part of this larger farm bill, something that you reported on, AG.
Yeah, and I will say that for our Jacksonville listeners, we don't have fluoride additives in our water. We have natural fluoride occurring in our water where we don't need it. But for a lot of cities that are listening right now, this will be in effect because it's statewide preemption on local governments deciding to add fluoride or other health additives. It's been framed as medicines in the water. Or even one representative talked about vaccines being added to the water, which I'd love to hear how that works.
And
But
it's not happening.
no, it's not. It's like the old thing on Dragnet where he talked about acid being dropped into the water supply or whatever. It's not happening. But yeah, no water additives. There's a lot of other things in that bill, some of which are more boring than others. But one of note to me is, as a vegan, is that it basically changes truth in labeling for things like coconut milk, almond milk, for simulations of meat products with plant-based protein. They are going to have to change the way they market, but this
And,
happens.
and break that down for us. So people who may not be familiar, those you can't, you would no longer be able to say soy milk, right?
Right, but there is a caveat. Basically, it'd be for the southern region, so other states have to adopt this language also before it actually kicks into gear. It's got to be 11 of the 14 states or whatever it is.
Right.
We're the only ones so far, so we'll see if copycat legislation down the road actually makes this an issue where they've got to have multiple marketing techniques. So for now, we're safe from that, but it would change the verbiage, and really, marketing is postmodern enterprise. It's all semantics, so they'd be able to come up with something that dodges this. But there's also things about drones in this bill.
Mhm.
Basically,
You can shoot down drones now if they're harassing you, apparently.
that's right.
But I also think this was politically, I think this was kind of a big win for Wilton Simpson, who
He needed one.
was at at
The head
one
of the
point,
Senate, yes.
right. Well, he's the agricultural commissioner now, but
Yes, sorry.
at
Apologize.
one point he was head of the Senate, and then but now he was at one point thought of as a candidate for governor, and he's kind of fallen a little bit to the wayside. But he needed something a win to kind of put his name back into that picture, and I think this was an opportunity to flex a little bit of power. I think even at the beginning of the session, they wanted to kind of put some of the immigration enforcement underneath him as well, and so you're seeing that there's a little bit of a clawback from kind of some of these older Republicans, and that he was able to get a win here on this bill and really get what he wanted. And then there's enough fodder for him to kind of to go out and campaign, as you say. So,
Yeah, but he'll probably run for re-election. I
Right,
mean, I
right,
think I
right.
think governor's close to him
Yeah.
because Byron Donalds is the Trump lane,
Of
Casey
course.
DeSantis, who knows what she's going to do. But there's not a lot of room for other candidates like him or Matt Gaetz or anyone you're even less familiar to our
Let's
listeners.
talk a little bit about Casey DeSantis because
Mm.
one of the things that sucked a lot of oxygen out of the room was this investigation into Hope Florida, which is a charity associated with her. There was many contentious committee meetings in the House about this. Initially, it appeared that was going to go much deeper in terms of people being subpoenaed to testify, and then it sort of ended with a whimper.
Mm.
What happened?
Yeah, and I alluded to this in the intro, but basically the Hope Florida Foundation got $10 million from the Medicaid settlement with Centene. and
Which is a provider, a medical provider, Centene. And
exactly. Basically, there were 58 million, give or take, in the settlement itself, of 10 million donations to the Hope Florida Foundation that didn't have strings attached. So what that basically did is went to two nonprofit groups that in turn donated the money to the Keep Florida Clean Committee, which was basically chaired by DeSantis's then chief of staff, now current attorney general, who was appointed, James Othmeyer, to basically squash these constitutional amendments. Alex Andrade, who's a chair of the House Healthcare Subcommittee that looked into this most closely, he thought it was money laundering. He thought it rose to the level of charges. This is something that reporters Alex Glorioso and Lawrence Miller of the Times Herald basically were leading the charge and reporting. But he tried to get them to come in. He tried to get people to come in to voluntarily testify. In his last meeting of session, if you're voluntarily asked to testify, you're not going to testify.
Yeah.
And so you need a subpoena. And he basically said time ran out. He's saying he's coming back to it next year. We'll see if it happens. But the upshot of this is basically it was mud on the white dress of Casey DeSantis.
Mhm.
It was a way of basically making Casey DeSantis look like just another political operative, even though the Hope Florida Foundation is not her baby. It's something that the governor's brought up. Governor basically said, I had nothing to do with Hope Florida. That was Casey's. And then, his argument's like, Casey didn't have anything to do with the Hope Florida Foundation. When you're explaining, you're losing. And so what this does is if it's not actionable, and it probably is not going to be actionable at this point in any legal sense, especially with Othmeyer being the attorney general, where do you go? Pam Bondi? Good luck. So
well, Andrade has basically said that this would be something for the FBI to look into, or investigators, at the federal level.
I'm sure Kash Patel will get right on that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of these interesting kind of things here because what had happened politically, but basically there was a settlement, and then part of the settlement was a $10 million extra donation, which I've never seen a settlement where you just give extra money away, but there was an extra 10 million that was basically given away to this Hope Foundation, and then it was used to combat the marijuana petition this year or last year. But what is even more interesting is they wanted part of DeSantis' goals this year was to have Hope Florida kind of under more of a solidified part of the government, and that was kind of stopped. Jen Bradley, our local Jen Bradley, had a bill to kind of stop also money from the government going into these kind of petitions, right? They solidified that.
That made it into that legislation we talked about.
And so now you're seeing kind of all of this putback based off of what happened, and now you're also seeing that it really did kind of kill any real Casey DeSantis for governor issues or potential at this point.
Do you think so? I mean, you think that the damage is that lasting?
I mean, it was clear that the Republicans in the House and Senate have really turned on that in a sense, and for them to do these kind of public kind of hearings is enough. And it's not something that would have happened in the first 4 years or 6 years of DeSantis being governor.
Yeah, and really, looking at that governor's race a little bit more, it's like Byron Donalds, he came out of the Florida House before he ran for Congress. He was there for 6 years.
And he's been endorsed by
President Trump.
Trump.
Yeah, and he's getting all his free media, Fox News and Newsmax and all of that. But, he's basically insulated from all of this. And, the Trump endorsement, with the fact that the legislature wants somebody who came out of their ranks to work with, because DeSantis was a Tallahassee outsider. And, that was going to be Adam Putnam's gig until Donald Trump plucked Ron DeSantis out of relative obscurity and brought him to statewide prominence.
Put him on the plane, and that was it, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a tweet, and there you go. But Byron Donalds is the golden child now. Casey DeSantis, the Stanti have basically begged for a co-endorsement, begged for a blessing from Trump. That's not coming. Byron Donalds and Donald Trump went to the UFC together down in Miami, earlier this year. And, it's going to be Byron Donalds' show.
Yeah. I do want to talk about a bill that is going to impact public schools, making it easier to convert public schools into charter schools. This, assuming the governor signs it into law, will be effective July 1. And it basically takes teachers and principals and school boards out of the negotiation, out of the consideration as to whether a school that is deemed failing in some aspect should be converted to a charter school. It'll be just left up to parents now.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be one of those bills that we look back and it's gonna be a bigger deal than it's currently being made of right now. The process is that, in order to take a failing school, it basically the school board, there's an application, the school board is also looking at it, and then there's, basically input from teachers, community, and parents, and what this bill is doing is 2 things. One is it's taking all of the kind of school board and administrators out of the process and leaving it just to a majority of parents. But the other thing it's saying is that any school that has not made an A in the last 5 years, for the consecutive 5 years, is now eligible to be converted. And I looked it up. 42 out of 190 schools in Jacksonville had an A. So the rest of those schools
Mhm.
are now eligible, and schools that are
And
on
and
the way
that's a
up.
huge change
Mhm.
because, I mean, it used to be if a school's failing, we'll consider it as a charter. Now the threshold would be if it doesn't get an A for 5 consecutive
Yeah,
years.
it used to be DNF schools were the ones that were eligible for them, and, there's arguments on either side about whether or not charter schools are better in those communities or not, but, what I will say is that there's also another part of this bill that doesn't allow kind of them to school boards to buy property, in without a 5-year plan and limits them, and so it's really limiting the school board's power in order over charter schools, but it's also really leaving it up to the parents in a neighborhood to have a majority vote to see if they're gonna change their school.
Just a minute left, AG. What are your final thoughts as we head into the Monday resumption of budget discussion?
I'm really curious to see, the local bill and negotiations and how those go. That's where the rubber hits the road for me. It's going to be something where they will have to tamp down the rhetoric. I'm talking about leadership of the House and Senate, and basically get to a collaborative place. I'm listening closely what the governor may say about budget. Basically the House and Senate are saying that they wanted smaller budgets than what the governor proposes. But I think in the end, what gets approved will be a smaller budget than what anybody envisions.
And with some tax relief for taxpayers?
That remains to be seen.
Yeah. All right. Well, Obi Umunna, AG Gancarski, you guys are terrific. Thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, how high schoolers can build a future while helping prepare for disaster. Welcome back. Well, we typically hear about the Red Cross at times of emergency, but the work of preparing for disasters is happening all the time. Here to tell us about how young people can help lay the groundwork is Harold Anderson. He's Regional Volunteer Engagement Specialist for the American Red Cross of Northeast Florida. Good morning, Harold.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you this morning?
Wonderful. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here this morning.
We're also joined by Keisha Sims. She is Service to the Armed Forces Regional Manager at the American Red Cross. Good morning,
Good
Keisha.
morning. Good
Thank you for
morning.
being here. So, Keisha, you've worked around the world as well as locally, supporting the military for 17 years. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to this work and some of the deployments that you've had overseas?
Absolutely. So I started out in Louisville, Kentucky, doing what we call our emergency communication messages. So that is verifying a situation to get our service members home as quickly as possible.
What kind of situation might that be?
It could be the death of an immediate family member or a grandparent. It could be an illness, but it can also be the birth of a child, which is always exciting for us to do. And so
And so the Red Cross is
Mhm.
involved in those kinds of communications.
Yes, so we are chartered by Congress to provide that service to the military, and it's helpful because it helps command make an informed decision about letting the service member come home, how long they can come home, and then it also helps with that financial assistance.
Gotcha. And so those are sometimes delicate conversations. That's something that you trained for?
Yes, so we do a intense training either in person or online. We learn about interview style and then also compassion and then also taking care of ourselves when we're doing those because we sometimes have calls where suicide is involved.
Mm.
And so making sure that we are being compassionate with our clients, but also being compassionate with ourselves.
All right. Um, the work that you've done, as I said, you've kind of also traveled more around the world. You've worked in Germany and Poland, Kuwait, Spain, Japan. How is it different working in those different environments?
So here in Jacksonville, we have our different departments. Overseas, we are the Red Cross. So you may have an office that has one person, and we do disaster, we do those Red Cross messages, training services. And so we live and work on military installations overseas. So we are embedded in that community. Shopping on base, going to church, that's our family. And so we do everything. And we really rely on our volunteers, which is normally either our service members and sometimes their dependents.
So, Harold, one of the things that you help coordinate here is ways for especially young people to get involved with
Yeah.
opportunities with the American Red Cross. What kind of opportunities are available, and uh, how do you talk to younger people about it? I mean, what is the value of that kind of work for them?
So one of the major ways that our young people can get involved that we really promote here is our Red Cross clubs. So Red Cross clubs are organizations or clubs that are formed in high schools and on college campuses, and it helps them partner with the local chapter in order to further the mission. One of the ways that they can get involved, things that they do is organize blood drives. They do preparedness events on their campuses and in the community. When I say preparedness, I mean disaster preparedness events.
Mm.
They come together to do home fire campaigns where they install smoke alarms in the local community in order to make sure that our homes and our houses are safer. They do things like fundraising for global relief efforts. And they just do anything that we do at our local Red Cross, they can do it there in their local school community.
And what do you find is the value for the Red Cross if young people are getting involved and kind of early on learning about some of these skills and services?
So 95% of the work that we do at the Red Cross is done through volunteers. Okay, so if we can start early, right, embedding this mission into them and getting them involved with this philanthropic work and this humanitarian efforts, then we have what sometimes, a lot of times, lifelong Red Crossers, and they end up becoming ingrained in the mission, ingrained in the work, and they stick with us a lot of time after they graduate from college and go on and in their other local communities.
A lot of people associate the Red Cross with certain things like learning, CPR, life-saving skills, right? And that kind of training, or, after a home fire, kind of being there and being a resource for the family. Are there things that the American Red Cross does that you think most people are less aware of?
I'm glad that you mentioned those 2 things because the first thing that usually comes up is blood services,
Yeah.
when people say American Red Cross, especially over in the States. As Lakeisha said, there's a difference. But other things that we do, like we said, is we do disaster preparedness. We don't just respond to disasters, but we also try to, make sure that the community is resilient and prepared before there are disasters in order to alleviate that before it even happens. We have training services where we just don't do CPR training, but we do water safety training. We do babysitting training.
Mm.
We do all type of trainings you can ever think of. We do it nationally at the Red Cross. Um, and so those are some of the areas that I think people don't know that we involve ourselves in, especially when it comes to disaster preparedness.
So disaster preparedness has gotten much more complicated. It's become a much larger task in recent years. We've seen so many disasters, whether it's wildfires that have been so devastating, or storms that have displaced people. The kind of the perils of climate change making all of those things a lot more challenging. So, how is the Red Cross responding to that, especially being so reliant on just volunteers to do the work?
I can't tell you enough how much our volunteers like really push and make the work that we do happen every day. We're so organized and well structured when it comes to that till we have volunteers that's all they do is focus on going out and doing outreach and preparedness, whether that be community preparedness in senior citizen facilities or in our local schools or in our local communities or whatever. They have that in place. So some of the ways that we do is just make sure that we stay vigilant, make sure we keep our volunteer base up, make sure everyone stays trained, and make sure that we make those community partnerships so that we can build a more resilient community.
And Keisha, one of the things that you help coordinate is this partnership with NAS Jacksonville and the hospital, the Naval Hospital. Can you just describe what opportunities are available to kids who participate in that? Because it sounds like a really neat behind the scenes, opportunity.
Absolutely. So the Red Cross has a program called Volunteer Program. And so it's for youth ages 14 to 17, and we partner with our military treatment facilities. And so we place them in a department and they get hands-on experience. So one of our big departments that the kids really enjoyed was ortho and PT and learning about the bones and different things. So it's giving them an insight to the health care facilities, but then it's also giving them an insight into how it works in the military and seeing it because sometimes it's a little different. So it's, there are futures. So a lot of these kids end up going into the military to be in that field because they started through the Red Cross Youth Club or
And
the
so
Red Cross
what
Youth
what do
Program.
they take from that? I mean, having gone through that kind of training and that experience.
So they get hours, which is obviously really great for scholarships. They get some networking because you're dealing with, officers. You're also dealing with enlisted in the military. And so because we PCS, we move around every 3 years, there's a possibility you're going
PCS.
to permanent change of station.
Okay.
So we move around every 3 years, which means you may come into contact with these people again, and then they can kind of help guide you and get you where you need to be in your career.
And do they typically enjoy that experience?
They love it. We've got every year we have returning students. I believe this year we have about 8 that are returning because they really enjoyed it.
Harold, how do kids, I mean, if they are interested in getting involved or if a parent wants to kind of urge their kid to get involved, where can they find information?
So the first place that they can go is to redcross.org/volunteer. And go on and check to see if their local high school or local college has a Red Cross club there. If they don't, we would love for them to start one. It's as easy as contacting the local chapter office or, like I said, going through the website at redcross.org/volunteer, and we will walk them through those steps on how they can start a Red Cross club there, and how they can even come in and get some training to be volunteers in our different lines of services as well.
Well, excellent. Keisha Sims, Harold Anderson, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it. And thanks for the work that you do.
Thanks for
All right,
having
thank
us.
you for having us.
All right. Up next, celebrate.
AEG presents Hauser, the Rebel is Back tour. The Croatian cellist brings his blend of classical, pop, and rock music to the St. Augustine Amphitheater on Sunday, May 18th at 8 p.m. Information at theamp.com. The City of Jacksonville presents the Jacksonville Jazz Festival. For over 40 years, the Jazz Fest has brought together music enthusiasts for a weekend of food, drinks, community, and music along the St. Johns River. Memorial Day weekend, May 22nd to 25th at Tailgaters Parking in downtown Jacksonville. This year's lineup includes The Roots, Janelle Monáe, Kool and the Gang, and more. Information at jacksonvillejazzfest.com. DuPont Counseling Group is a team of therapists, psychiatrists, and counselors available to help with life's mental health challenges. Everyone needs help sometimes. More information can be found at jacksonvillecounseling.org.
Way back in 2009, then Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano declared,
Real ID in a way is DOA. I mean, it's just not being done.
a decade and a half later, that's finally changed. Starting May 7th, you will have to have a real ID to board a U.S. domestic flight. What's taken states so long to comply, and will those new IDs be effective anyway? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
After After a 5-year pause, federal student loan payments have resumed for millions of borrowers in default. Collections were paused in 2020. Now they're back, and some payments could be taken directly from borrowers' paychecks. It comes alongside major changes to the Pell Grant and PLUS loan programs. Your student loan questions answered next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, a new collaborative portrait exhibit celebrates queer joy through the lens of two very different photographers. Here to tell us about it, I'm joined by photo artist Kat Tarbett, also known as Kat Culture. Welcome, Kat.
Hey, thanks for having us.
And Celeste Burns. Good morning, Celeste.
Hi, good morning.
So I want to ask you, the title of this exhibit is Don't Say Gay, very clearly a reference to the bill that's sort of known colloquially by that name. Kat, why choose that title?
Yeah, great question. So obviously, Florida is no stranger to this kind of legislation that seeks to attack queer people and really eliminate us from the conversation altogether. So we wanted to take a moment to dedicate a gallery to queer joy and just visibility and really celebrating the vibrant culture that we have in Florida.
And I would guess in like some other movements, it's an effort to kind of reclaim that
Yes, definitely.
that verbiage.
Yeah, we want to counter kind of the saying and create something positive out of it.
Because obviously you're going to be centering sort of the LGBTQ
Yeah,
experience in some of the artwork that you do.
yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Celeste, I mean, you guys are both, prolific photographers in the community. What led you to decide to do a collaboration?
Yeah, so I've loved Kat's work for some time now. Of course, Jacksonville, it has a very strong and vibrant queer community, but we're also pretty close knit. And so there tends to be kind of this sense of community over competition in general. And I've always had that with Kat. We work in the same studio building together. And so over kind of the course of time, we would plan out little projects, dream a little bit about how to greater represent the queer community here in Jacksonville with imagery. And then from there, the show kind of took a really exciting turn, and we decided to really focus kind of separately and together at gathering some amazing queer people in the community to depict and showcase together and separately.
And your styles are so different, but they're both so captivating. Kat, your work is just so colorful and, kind of pop arty and very diverse in its representation. It's almost got a little bit of a cartoon edge. And Celeste, your work is just very, kind of thoughtful and intimate. You do a lot of wedding photography. In fact, your work's been featured in the New York Times.
Thank you. Yes.
But you have these just beautiful, tender moments. And so your styles are very different. How did you choose the work to kind of show together?
I feel as though as artists we have a fingerprint, and it's kind of in our nature to have that instinct, right? Kind of the way that you aesthetically are drawn it's hard to get away from. And so it was almost natural for the way that we kind of pursued this project. At least for me, I felt like tapping into emotion and softness and dreaminess is my nature as an artist. And I knew that together with contrast to Kat's beautiful, kitschy, bright style, that it could really complement each other.
Yeah, and we are showing for people who are watching on our live stream. We are showing both of your photos on a reel here. How about you? What kind of work were you selecting, Kat?
Yeah, so in my business, I focus a lot on creative portraiture. So my work is leaning more on the surrealism end, but definitely bright colors. And I really love campiness. So I kind of wanted to follow through with that into the series and tie in some of the like Florida kitsch that we see, like when you go to like a Florida gift shop or you see a welcome to Florida postcard. So I wanted to tie in some of that imagery into this show.
And in fact, the poster for the
Yeah.
show is this sort of iconic Florida lettering, that you would see on a kind of wish you were here style
Yeah.
postcard, but it's the Don't Say Gay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we really wanted to bring that in and yeah, just celebrate our cool culture that we got here.
The portraiture that you do, you very often work in other kind of inanimate objects. How do you choose those? Are those based on the characters that you're photographing? Do they have some relation to them? Or are they just kind of like neat things to catch your eye?
Yeah, so I really focus on the color. Like, I love how bright colors work together. I'm looking at color schemes. I'm looking at even the material of like the prop, for example. I think we have one in the show that has a giant like inflatable pool gator, and I just love the way plastic photographs. It's very shiny. It's just like, yeah, no, I love it. So I'm very interested in like the visuals of it. Just yeah, very bright, very fun, very saturated.
And Celeste, for people, it actually opens on May 9th, and there's an event that people can attend at the Share Art Gallery. Can you tell us just a little bit about what the opening is going to involve, and then just what you want the community that attends to take from it?
Absolutely. So, really, what we want it to be is just a huge celebration of the community in general. So, we're really excited to kind of host queer people, allies, people that are a part of the community that want to learn more about what the Jacksonville queer community has to offer to the city in general. And so I'm really excited with some of the things we've developed. We have a couple interactive pieces for the gallery show opening as well. We have some postcards with some of our imagery, as well as the Don't Say Gay poster. And you'll be able to send those with some postage stamps to whoever you want as kind of an interactive way to bring out that Florida kitsch again. As well as a queer DJ. So there's going to be a lot of energy and fun.
Yeah, it's
Excellent. Well, it's the Share Art Gallery in San Marco, May 9th. Starts at 7. Kat Tarbett, Celeste Burns, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much.
All right, and thank you for listening. Please join us tomorrow when we'll tell you about a great resource for parents of premature newborns, a free home cleaning service for NICU families. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com.
On May 16th and 17th, over 100 vocalists perform Mozart's Requiem alongside Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante, spotlighting concertmaster Adelia Nartadieva and principal violist Yunting Kuo. Visit jacksymphony.org.
This is WJCT News